Hi everybody, and welcome to my second video of 3 introducing the Canon A-1. So in the first video we kind of overviewed the camera, we looked at the interface, and we talked a little bit about where the buttons are and what they do. In the third video we're going to look at how to use the power winder that I was loaned with this camera. And in this video we're going to go pretty in depth and talk about how to specifically do different things with this camera. So we're going to start basic. And by basic I mean we're going to mount and unmount the lens. So right now the lens is mounted on the camera. With the silver breech mount lenses, you simply rotate the silver thing anti-clockwise until the red dot lines up with the red dot on the camera, and then you can take it off, just like that. To put it on then, you do exactly the opposite. You put the red dot, align it with the red dot, and turn it clockwise. And that's how you mount and unmount the lenses. To load the film, put the film cassette or spool, it's an interchangeable term for that, inside the cassette take-up area, or cassette holding area rather. Pull out a leader. This part of the film that we're pulling out of the cassette is the leader, and feed the leader into the film take-up spool. What you want to do is make sure you set the camera to TV, to shutter value mode, and set it at a shutter speed faster than 1/60th. Only because, actually faster than a half second is fine, but the faster it is the better, because you don't want to sit around waiting for a 30-second exposure if you have it in aperture value mode. So activate the shutter, advance the film lever. There you go. And then you close the film back. Okay, so now you're ready to go shooting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the film back, something that you should definitely not ever do, because when this film's exposed to light, it's ruined. So what I'm going to do is show you what happens when you take a picture. First thing, let's take this film cassette out. So you line up your picture in front of you, you get all your settings correct, and you hit the shutter button. You might have been able to see a very quick shutter motion right there. So it activates the shutter, and then as you take up the film into the take-up spool, it cocks the shutter and puts the curtains back into their original position. So let's take a look at this again. Now, just to activate the shutter, let's watch what happens with the film and the take-up spool over here. And you can see that it's taking up the film. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening when we do this. So let's say that my hand here represents the shutter, and it's blocking the film from any sort of light coming in through the lens. And it'll actually be easier to do it like this. Okay, so let's say that it's blocking the film, right? So you take the picture, and the shutter opens this way, and then a trailing shutter closes behind it again to reblock the camera. Now when you advance the film and cock the shutter, they go back into position like that. And we talked a little bit about the flash shutter sync being 1/60th of a second. What that means is that at 1/60th of a second, you take the picture, the first film curtain opens all the way, it's open, and then the entire film plane is exposed to light for a very brief moment, and then the trailing curtain comes in behind it. At 1/30th of a second, it stays open for a little bit longer, and then the curtain at 1 second, it stays open for a very, very long time, and then the trailing curtain. The curtains always move at exactly the same speed regardless of what your shutter speed is. You get a different shutter speed by the amount of space between the curtains when you take a picture. So what happens is at 1/125th, when your first curtain is right here, the second curtain starts coming in behind it. At 1/1000th, it's something like that. So what's happening is it's not the physical speed with which the camera's curtains are moving that determines the shutter speed, but the amount of time at which the film is exposed to light that determines the shutter speed. So now you keep going, taking your pictures, and they're all turning out really, really well, because that's what happens when you take a roll of film. Every picture turns out perfectly beautiful. I know that from experience. And so to rewind your film, You just push the release button in here. If you have the power winder on the bottom, then there's a release button on the bottom of the power winder which pushes this button. With that button pushed in, then you rewind it. Now, of course, bearing in mind your film back would be closed all the time and you wouldn't have to actually hold this in place. You don't ever want to open up the film back except to put in your film and take out a completely exposed roll of film. If you were rewinding your film for real, you would want to take it back into the film cassette entirely, but I'm going to use this on another video, so I don't want to do that. So that's how you load film, rewind film, and take a whole bunch of pictures with this camera. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the power grip off and put it back on. I'll show you how to do that. Typically, these can be unscrewed just with your fingers, just like that. But if you've done a good job of putting it on and it's really jammed or it's stuck with time and age, what you need to do is grab your nearest 5 Swiss francs piece, and then you can just put it into that little wedge head space right there and then unscrew it enough to get that off. And you have to take the power grip off in order to change the battery. You change the battery by pushing on this little door, and this is the same with all of the Canon A series bodies. Just push on that door, and then you take out the battery and put a new one in. It uses a 4LR44 battery, or there are other kinds. This is an alkaline battery. It's actually not the best idea in the world to use alkaline batteries because they lose voltage over time, and so over time your meter will become less accurate. So using a silver battery, a silver oxide battery, is preferable. I forget what the designation for that is. To put the power grip back on, you just do the same thing in reverse, and it should fit snugly. There's a little clip under there that I really did a good job of tightening at that time. There's this little clip right here that the power grip clips onto, and then that's the hole that the power grip screws into. And it goes on just like that. There we go. And that's how you do it. Oh, the battery. The other designation for the battery is PX28. So in terms of camera features, we went through them in the first video. This camera has effectively every single camera feature that a camera of its age could have, and in fact many features that a lot of cameras of our age don't have, except MLU, which is mirror lockup mode. That's the only feature that's missing from this camera, and it's conspicuously missing as well. It's very nice to have MLU if you're doing things like astrophotography or star trails or any kind of long duration photography. So next thing is setting the ISO and using the exposure compensation. The focusing screen on this can be interchanged, and some of them, for instance, the grid type focusing screen requires a slight exposure compensation because of the way that the meter reads the light coming through the focusing screen and prism. So if you have a different focusing screen in here, you'll want to read the instructions to find out what the compensation is, but the easiest way to do it is to do everything else normally, but just adjust the exposure compensation dial a little bit. To change the ISO, there's a little silver button up here on the top. So you pinch it like this, and then you rotate. That's the easiest way to do it. In fact, I'm doing it one-handed, and I'm basically terrible at these things. Let's try it again. I'm actually going to do it two-handed. It's a little bit easier. So you just pinch in the silver button and then rotate this, and then you just set it to whatever ISO you'd like it to be. The other way to hold it is like this. It's not working so well this time. At any rate, it is a bit fiddly. I'm going to acknowledge that. It's a bit fiddly. So get your ISO set and set it there. It's got a pretty amazing ISO range from the 6 to 12,800, so it allows you to do a lot of pushing and pulling your film. And it's a little bit outside the scope of this video. I'll do a different video on pushing and pulling film in the near future. But you can do some extremely good creative effects through pushing and pulling with this camera. here's the LCD viewfinder on and off switch, and I believe that this is on and this is off. But what this does is when you're looking through the viewfinder, there's an LCD inside of it. This one does not work, so I can't demonstrate it. But the on-off switch will turn the LCD information inside the camera off, so it's less distracting, and then you really have nothing. You have a very clear field of view, and there's no meter information, no bright lights to distract you, and it makes composition and photography just a little bit easier. It's an incredibly nice and well thought out feature. Many kudos to Canon on that. We're going to take a look at these two buttons. They are the exposure memory switch, which is the top of the two buttons, this little tiny black one right here. And what that does is that's for taking a meter reading, locking your settings, and recomposing, and then retaking the image. So let's take a look at how that might play out. All right, so here is what I mean when I say exposure compensation, and using exposure compensation on the camera, and either through an automatic button on the camera or through manually doing exposure compensation. So let's say that this represents a scene that you're looking at through your viewfinder, and what you've got over here is you've got grass, you've got some grassy stuff over here that represents grass, and then it transitions very abruptly into water with a big old tsunami wave or something in it, and that represents water, and that little fish stuck up there. Oh no, he's frowning, he's very afraid. Then over here we have this tree coming out, and actually it's not really a tree, it's mutant broccoli, but we've got that tree, and we've got the sun over here. I don't have a yellow dry erase marker, so the sun is red. It's a red giant. We're at the end of time here. And this tree is casting a shadow in this area, which is all well and good, except that that's where your buddy's standing, waving to you. Or maybe he's being held up at gunpoint, who knows. And so there's your buddy. You want to get a picture of him, but he's in this fairly dark, shadowy area. So if you were to take a meter reading of this entire image, let's say that at f5.6, the entire image would be 1/500th. And the reason is because you've got a lot of bright sunlight up here. There's a lot of light reflecting off of this water, and a relatively small area of shade, and also the brightness of the sun. So that's going to drive a fairly short exposure period. Now the problem is that this is all going to be properly exposed, and this is going to be very dark. So to compensate for that, what you want to do is shift your camera over to this shaded area and meter off of this shaded area. And that's going to give you something more like f5.6 at probably 60th or 1/25th, say 1/60th. Now what that's going to do is that's going to make this properly exposed, and all of this is going to be super blown out and white. And that's okay, because your subject is your buddy who's waving to you from the shade over there. He's saying, "Neener, neener, neener, I'm in the shade, you're in the hot sun," which is coming to eat our planet because it's a red giant now. And the other thing you could do, so what you could do is you take your shot 1/60th to get that properly exposed. You could take 1/500th to get all of this properly exposed, and then you could split the difference at 1/200th, or if you have standard stops on your camera, 1/25th. And that would give you a more even exposure across the entire field. If you're using film, that's a good way to bracket your photos. If you're using digital, you could then recombine all of those in post to make a single image which is properly exposed across the entire area. And so exposure on the Canon A-1 with this scene, what you're doing with the exposure compensation is you're going to take a reading over in that area, going to push this top button right here, and then as long as you hold that button down, it's going to remember these settings so you can recompose for the whole area and take your picture and not have it turn out in any kind of, and it'll turn out as you want it to, not as the camera sees the image. Because the camera's meter is ultimately passive. It can tell you what to do, but it can't tell you how to do it. You've got to figure out what it's telling you in order to do that. So in technical terms, what this button does is as long as you keep it pressed down, it stores in the camera's memory the overall exposure value. That translates into the settings that we use, but the camera sees the field as an exposure value. Multiple exposures. Making a multiple exposure shot with the Canon A1 is incredibly easy. And a lot of pro grade and advanced level cameras have very easy multiple exposure features. So the way that you do it is you're going to take a picture, take your shot, then you switch this lever over here so that the red dot is exposed, and then you advance. And now what's happened is it's advanced the shutter and recocked the shutter, but has not advanced the film. Now you take your second picture and you're done. You've taken your two exposures. After any double exposure, you want to put the cap back on the lens and take a dead shot, just to make sure that you don't have any overlap, because sometimes the film sprocket will not re-engage right away after a double exposure, and so part of your double exposure frame will be cut off. Now, say you want to make a triple, quadruple, or 100 exposures on the same image, you can do that. Just keep repeating that process, and every time you advance the frame and every time you take a picture with the shutter release, just push that before you advance the frame. One thing to bear in mind is that you need to compensate with multiple exposures. So there's a pretty easy way to do that with this camera. For double exposures, you need twice as much light as a single exposure. So you push down the exposure compensation lock dial and turn it to 1/2. Oops, 1/2. Now, if you take two shots of the same subject or same-ish lighting, what's going to happen is they'll each give you half of the light, giving you one properly exposed double exposure shot. Now, if you want to do a triple exposure, then what you need to do is put this at one of these two dials between the 1/2 and the 1/4, either the first or the second. It just said halfway in between. There's no half stop there. So I would just go 1/3 of a stop beyond the 1/2. For quadruple exposures, you go to the 1/4 mark. And so that's double, triple, and quadruple. If you go crazy and need to do many more than that, then you just have to compensate. So there is a known bug in this camera, and all of the models have this, and that is on some of these cameras, moving the aperture away from A and then back will lock the camera. And it's not on all of these, I should say. Let me clarify. It does not happen with all cameras. So I'm going to show you how to attempt to replicate it on yours. So you put the lens on your camera, and right now you can see that the aperture setting is at A. So I can take a picture, everything's going just fine, everything's working. If I move it away from A to whatever I want to go to, and then right back to A, on some cameras it locks up. Not this one. On this one, it just causes it to get the Canon squeak. So there is a fix for that. If your camera has that bug, to unlock the camera, what you need to do is move the multiple exposure dial to the left, advance the film, and your camera should be ready to go again. All right, here's the view through the viewfinder, and this is the kit viewfinder screen, focusing screen that it comes with, the A1. You can see it's got the little rangefinder split ring in the middle. And so when you focus, as you get out of focus, the object appears to split away from itself and also get blurry outside of that split ring. There we go. Now as we look around the viewfinder, you can see that there's not a lot to see, which is very good. It means it's not distracting. You can see my LCD screen, like I said, isn't working, but along the bottom would be your LCD screen on a working one that would tell you things like your metering information and shutter speed and whether or not you need to use a flash and things like that. So there it is. That's the view through the Canon A1's viewfinder. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer those. And the some other details about this. The meter on this, like I said in the first video, is a center weighted through the lens meter. And like the AE1, it has actually the AE1 program meter in it. It's probably a more advanced version of that and should be center weighted 60/40. I actually wasn't able to find anywhere online where it said what the split was, but I did see some references saying that it's got this AE1 program meter with more advanced design, so that would be a 60/40 type. At any rate, if you have any questions, please leave those below. I try to respond to them pretty quickly. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them as well. If you have ideas for future videos, please let me know. I'm more than happy to do those if I have the equipment and the technical know-how to do them. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching.